So now we're going to talk about aspects of narrative time. And we're going to talk about summary and scene. I'm going to group those together. And we're going to talk about white space, flashback, which is, I think, very important, and slow motion. So let us start with, if my slides will advance. Here we go. Aspects of narrative time. The narrative in a story covers a specific time. It can be 24 hours or 24 years. Sometimes time is telescoped and sometimes it's stretched. The history of the world can be covered in one sentence, right? We've seen summaries that are that succinct. And 4 seconds of crisis may take an entire chapter. So time is a very elastic thing when you're writing. And how you handle the passage of time requires an understanding of these literary tools we're going to be talking about and using them well. All right, so let's talk summary and scene. These are both methods of treating time in fiction. A summary covers a long period of time in a relatively short passage, and a scene deals at length with a relatively short period of time. It helps to think of summary as kind of the mortar of the story, and scene or action are actually the bricks. Summary is a useful device to give information and fill in a character's background, to create a transition or leap moments or years. But scene is crucial. It's how you allow readers to experience the story with the characters. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. When you want to get a reader's full attention, you want to take a lesson from a child in a tantrum and you want to make a scene. And I love this picture, it made me laugh. One common error of beginning fiction writers is to summarize rather than realize action through the scene. So if you're just at the beginning of your writing career, I think it's really important to pay attention to the summary versus scene. Most writers are going to use a blend, and we're going to take a look at that. I'm not sure who, Sheila, I think, could you go on mute maybe?
Yes, I don't think I'm moving, but that's okay.
Okay, I'm getting a lot of.
Somebody is. I'm picking up a lot of background noise.
So yeah, maybe unless you're asking a question, maybe we should mute just so we can.
No problem.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. All right, so we're going to take a look at a blend of summary and scene. There are 2 ways to handle summary. One is sequential, so we were relating events in kind of a sequence, but compressing them. And one is circumstantial, which can start with the description of what typically or frequently happens. The first example I'm going to give you is sequential. This is from Eric Larson's The Devil in the White City. And this kind of gives us a good sequence of events. Daylight faded to thin broth. The sidewalks filled with men and women leaving work. Cab drivers cursed and gentled their horses. A lamplighter scuttled along the edges of the crowd, igniting the gas jets atop cast iron poles. Abruptly, there was color everywhere. The yellow streetcars and the sudden blues of telegraph boys jolting past with satchels full of joy and gloom. Cab drivers lighting the red night lamps at the backs of their hansoms. A large gilded lion crouching before the hat store across the street. In the high buildings above, gas and electric lights bloomed in the dusk like moonflowers. So we can see a clear sequence of events here, that this daylight is fading to night. In the next example, we're going to see something more circumstantial, something that typically happens. And I kept the example that was used in writing fiction. This is from Margaret Atwood's Lady Oracle. My own job was fairly simple. I stood at the back of the archery range wearing a red leather apron and rented out the arrows. When the barrels of arrows were almost used up, I'd go down to the straw targets. The difficulty was we couldn't make sure all the arrows had actually been shot before we went to clear the targets. Rob would shout, "Bows down, please. Arrows off the string." But occasionally, someone would let an arrow go on purpose or by accident. This was how I got shot. We'd pulled the arrows and the men were carrying the barrels back to the line. I was replacing a target face and I just bent over. So we can see how she goes through what typically happens, and then we narrow in on this particular scene. Does anybody have any questions about the last two examples? I am not able to see anybody, so.
Oh, I'm sorry. No,
Okay.
no.
All right. All right, let's talk about white space. I am so proud of the example I found of this, so I just have to say that. To transition from one moment in time to another without boring the reader with unnecessary details, you can use white space. So this is similar to a scene transition in film, where the scene quickly goes from night to day, from city to country, from graduating school to working a job. It's the narrative equivalent cut to in film. And it's interesting because in the book, she talks a lot about Victorian era novels and how they didn't have this magical white space. So if somebody went, from downstairs to upstairs, if it changed from night to day, you had to cover that in the writing. So I just think it's very interesting that it's a more modern thing to use white space. So now the logic is, if the transition is in itself integral to the plot, then consider skipping scenes and using this tool. Consider getting back to the action, in other words. So let's look at an example of this. My favorite author, James Salter. This is from A Sport and a Pastime. Autumn, still as a churchyard, tile roofs dark with moss, the amphitheater, the great central square, the Champ de Mars. Now in the blue of autumn it appears, the old town, provincial autumn that touches the bone. The summer has ended, the garden withers, the mornings become chill. I am 30, I am 34. The days turn dry as leaves. Isn't that beautiful?
It is. But now where is the white space there?
I am 30, I am 34. He just skipped 4 years for you.
Oh,
So he's saying like nothing's really changing in those 4 years. It's
Right.
all the same.
It's all the same. The years turn dry as leaves. It's just passing quickly. There's nothing much going on. And we've skipped 4 years ahead, so that when we get back into the action, we know, we may have come in when he was, 25, or maybe he was 30. And then when we get into the next scene of action, 4 years have passed.
see, I thought that was going to be like, you end a paragraph and then you put like 2 extra spaces, since I'm literal minded, and now we're in a new scene, right?
It can be that. It can be as simple as that. It can be that.
But he's not actually changing a scene here. He's just saying, nothing really changed in those 4 years. So we're just going to go past that.
That's right. So let me look very quickly and let's see if I can find her example of white space. Hang on, I'm almost there.
Isn't it like if the character is walking across the floor to open up the door, you don't say he's walking across the floor. You just say, he turned, opened the door, whatever, and that would be a form of white space, wouldn't it?
Yeah, but I don't know that that's exactly what she's talking about. So, she says it was, I'm just going to read a little bit. It was the tradition of a Victorian novel to be divided into chapters with no internal breaks in the narrative, and that habit carried into the 20th century. This meant that if a character or characters needed to go from here to there in order to get from one scene to another, whether across the country or up the stairs, from night to morning, from childhood to adulthood, the reader needed to be taken with them. Nothing is clumsier than to end one paragraph with the family piling into the car and beginning the next with 3 hours later. In the case of the trick to create the intervening space or time quickly, an image or two, an indication of mood, a sense of miles or years involved. So she hasn't, go ahead. Somebody have a question?
I don't think so.
Okay, so her example here is from E.M. Forster, A Passage to India. They meant to climb to the rocking stone on the summit, but it was too far, and they contented themselves with a big group of caves. En route for these, they encountered, so she's highlighted en route for these, they encountered several isolated caves, which the guide persuaded them to visit, but really there, so she's saying en route is the white space there. It's again, we're dealing with aspects of narrative time. So it's how you, it's not necessarily how you end or begin the next scene. It's how you, we're dealing with summary, how we skip time very quickly without boring the reader.
And making decisions about what needs to be provided, I guess, to
Yeah.
versus what doesn't.
Yeah, but it could, I mean, she talks about the slow fade out, a black screen, a swipe, a cameo shot. You know, fiction has adopted the white space as the narrative equivalent of cut to. So it could very much be, you know, the family's having dinner and, you know, we cut to the next morning, or we cut to, you know, dinner a week later.
I
Okay.
think filmmaking has had a huge impact.
Oh, yes,
I
absolutely.
agree. Yeah, I agree. We tell stories differently since the, you know, since the advent of television, I think.
Another example would be from film, but it would be, you know, when you see people watching a show and you see people going into a meeting and you know they're going to spend an hour there, but you hear 3 lines of dialogue. In that white space, then that you aren't given all the gory details, but the high points,
Yeah.
three dialogue.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to move on to flashback, which is exactly as it sounds. It's both a magical tool and a crutch, she calls it. Used well, revealing something from the past at the right time can propel a story forward. But when it's overused, say to fill in backstory, it can be intrusive and can interrupt the plot. Many beginning writers overuse flashback. When you're tempted to use flashback, go ahead and write the passage. Then go back over what you've written and see how little you can use to convey what's needed. Make sure you get a strong transition and be sparse. Keep the story moving. So I do notice this, and I was reading a book, The Magpie Murders. Has anybody read that?
The Mad Piper?
Magpie Murders.
By Horowitz.
No.
It was highly recommended. And I'll tell you, I started it and I think I got to chapter 2 and it was so filled with backstory. Every paragraph started an action and then went backwards in time to tell us everything about this. I couldn't go on. So I think backstory can be pretty intrusive if you're not careful.
It takes you out of the story and out of the tension, and it bores the heck out of you. So just give the great details that are important and move on.
And the funny thing is, I love backstory when it's revealed over time in little bits and pieces. So you're like putting together a puzzle about the character.
Right.
So yeah, I pulled a couple of examples here that I thought were good. This is from Abigail Thomas's Safekeeping. She pauses, waiting for the light. For some reason, the old Waylands on the corner of 6th Avenue and 8th Street occupies a soft spot in her memory. It is gone now, that dreadful place with the lunch counter where 24 hours a day people sat slumped over cups of bad coffee, and at 4 a.m. you could buy cigarettes in Banaka. She wouldn't return to those days, but she can cry over them, as if youth were a limb that had tormented her, and its phantom remains, and she can still feel it aching and misses it because it was her own. Yeah, I like this because, so what can we tell about the character? What can we tell about the backstory of the character from this?
She has a tortured past. I love the metaphor of her missing limb that's still tormenting her.
Yep.
And gosh, we all miss our youth, you know? You can't not miss your youth. Aging is not fun.
No, it's not.
Well, we know, yeah, she's up there in years because she has time to regret. I mean, she's thinking of that.
Mhm.
And she must be sad,
Mhm.
which is more than just her age, I imagine.
Mhm.
Something in her life that's causing that. So
Yeah, I would say we know that she lived in a city, right? We know that she was the type of girl that might have been up 24 hours a day to see those people slumped over their bad coffee and she might have bought cigarettes in Banaka, right?
she might have been a waitress, as Elaine says.
Right, could be. But I think there's a lot that comes through on this about her memory of this place that's no longer there, and we begin to pick up hints of who she is. I'll give you one more example. This is from Kate Braverman's Squandering the Blue. She remembers Northern California. It was a spicy yellow autumn, punched out and alive. She was driving the car she would later crash. It was after Maui. She was driving the car the only way she thought possible, too fast, with a bottle of vodka and a brown paper bag on the front seat. It sat next to her. It was one of her friends, after all. She was playing Dylan with the volume turned all the way up. She had a quarter of an ounce of cocaine folded in plastic in her jacket pocket. She touched it as she drove. It was her talisman from the gods she understood. She worshipped and adored it. So what can we tell about this?
I think that's Anne Hesh. Well, she lives her life fast and hard.
Mm-hmm.
Alcohol and drug problem.
Mm-hmm.
I sense that she's young.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
She's lonely. Yeah, the vodka is one of her only friends, so that says a lot about her.
Yeah, lonely, I heard somebody say. So these, I think, are really good examples where we're learning a little bit about the character, but it's more interesting than just telling us that was a alcohol and drug abuser when she was young and she wrecked her car. Right?
Right.
It's way more fun. So I just think have fun with your backstory, have fun with flashback, and don't, have some faith in your readers that they're going to want to piece it together. They don't want it just spoon-fed to them.
And that's just a paragraph, right? So, I mean,
Right.
you think of a flashback as being like a whole chapter of history, but that was a very effective paragraph that affects the same information and description and character.
Yeah, if you keep me in a flashback for a whole chapter, I'm probably going to put the book down.
It depends on how interesting, but yeah, I agree. And I think, again, we're not dealing with character development here. We're not dealing with metaphor. We're dealing with aspects of narrative time and using flashback to get across time. So even though my questions were more targeted about the character, I think these were examples meant to convey a little bit of time. And you got, in the first example, the fact that the woman was older, in this example that she was younger. So, all right. Slow motion. And this is our last bit of chapter 5. Slow motion, when characters experience moments of great intensity, their sense becomes especially alert and they register more than usual. This can be an odd sense of time slowing down, since we see, hear, smell, and remember ordinary sensations with extraordinary clarity. Characters do not say, "Oh my God, we're going to die," or "What an outrage." Instead, They record the sound of a twisting doorknob, the red car that passes on the street, the sudden chill on their skin in the dark. I think this is particularly important for writers of mystery, correct? I mean, we want to really be able to use slow motion well, because we do have these moments of great intensity in these types of novels. So we'll look at an example. This is from Jose Saramago's Blindness. I must open my eyes, thought the doctor's wife. She told herself she would count up to 10 and then open her eyelids. She said it twice, counted twice, failed to open them twice. She could hear her husband breathing deeply in the next bed and someone snoring. I wonder how the wound on that fellow's leg is doing, she asked herself, but knew at that moment that she felt no real compassion. What she wanted was to pretend that she was worried about something else. What she wanted was not to have to open her eyes. She opened them the following instant, just like that, not because of any conscious decision. I'm not blind, she murmured. So this is a brief moment of waking up, and we've taken a whole paragraph, and we're able to convey, a lot of things about the intensity of her emotion. What would you guys say is the overriding emotion here?
Fear,
Mm-hmm.
what Lorena said.
What did Lorena say?
Fear.
Fear. Okay. Yeah. Fear, anxiety. Yeah.
Dread, yeah.
Read. Has anybody read Blindness?
No.
Oh, yeah. I hesitate to recommend. It's very well written, but there are some scenes in there that will never leave my brain. So. All right, so fictional setting. Janet Burroway cautions us, beginning writers often skimp on the elements of setting and time, probably because we had to read so many dreary long descriptions while we were in school. We've all yawned over authors indulging themselves on the beauties of nature, the wealth of decor. Dickens comes to mind. It does not take exceptional literary skill to imagine a scene and then describe everything there. Skill comes from finding the details that instantly convey the setting and moving on with the story. When atmosphere is well created, we do not experience it as a description, we simply experience it. She advises that once writers become adept at the skill of manipulating atmosphere, we will find that fictional setting is a liberating opportunity. I am waiting for that day.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right.